This time on The Adventures of Tarka, we get our first taste of the beautiful San Blas Islands, have some close encounters of the stingy kind, and discover that dengue fever may have followed us from Colombia. After a most unpleasant passage from Colombia, we had, to much excitement, finally arrived in the San Blas Islands. And by some miracle, had made it just in time to meet up with Nusha's sister and her boyfriend Tyler, who, coincidentally, is also an American. San Blas is home to at least 360 individual islands, most are uninhabited, and pretty much every one is a picture of paradise. We were excited to explore these idyllic palm-covered treasures with our guest, despite having to suddenly share the space of our tiny home with 4 people. But, first things first, we needed to make a few repairs to the damage incurred during our passage here. The wind vane, one of the wind vane supports, sheared a bolt. Our steering situation was an easy fix once anchored, but because the wind vane was hard over most of the passage, a bolt on the wind vane bracket had sheared. It's no big deal though, and I took this opportunity to reseal all the wind vane fittings, with Tyler lending a very helpful hand. Maybe we should have guests on board more often. With the chores out of the way, we set about exploring the islands in our immediate vicinity. Our little dinghy barely fits 4 people, but we made do.
Where's the anchor alarm?
We lifted more than 30 meters and I have an anchor alarm on. So.
It's the phone if you have the phone on the boat. Oh! No, it thinks the silver is going that far from the anchor, so they think like it.
There's a popular wreck here in very shallow water, so we decided to check that out first. And we were lucky to bump into friends here on a boat called Snowflake, our neighbors that got stuck in the mud back in Colombia. They were anchored near the wreck, so we just tied up to them. And with that, we were in the water. Getting around with 4 people in the dinghy is taking some getting used to. For one, we definitely use more gas than we would normally.
We're gonna drift to the ocean. We're gonna die.
A good example of why it's always good to carry extra fuel around. And that's a good thing too, as there are countless islands to visit. Though the shallows necessitate a bit more of a hands-on approach.
Oh, this is nice. No, I gotta film. I got jobs to do.
Let's start.
I think we're becoming well adjusted to life in paradise, even if it has only been a few days. At least we're certainly getting the important bits nailed down well. Though San Blas is fairly remote and difficult to access, it still sees some tourism. So we decided to hoist the sails and set off for something more secluded. Roni and Tyler aren't sailors, so it's lucky for them, and for us too, that the sailing here is mostly in protected water, free of big waves, but still with the trusty trade winds providing plenty of sail power. Yet even these small waves can be a lot for the uninitiated.
Enjoying it?
I'm trying to drink some water.
Navigation in San Blas is sometimes a tricky affair, and the only really good source of charts marking all the reefs and shoals is a single book, which has become our Bible for our time here. This is actually the first time we've used paper charts as a primary source of navigation. Alright, so we need to come in through here, but on our Navionics app, it just shows a reef, which isn't exactly very helpful. So we're going to plot some waypoints on here and then transfer them over to Navionics real quick. This looks good here. And then I'll come in there. And then there, and then once we're in, we're safe, so we just need these 3 waypoints. Show a map. Looks good to me. Okay, so I've now added all 3 waypoints in a route, which we got from our chart. And so now I feel pretty safe about coming in, even though our chart shows a reef here. We could also use digital versions of these charts directly in OpenCPN, but we don't have a good setup for that right now, so it's more of a backup for the time being. After a mere afternoon of sailing, we had covered the 20 miles to our destination. We then dropped the hook practically on the beach of this tiny island. Since we're new to San Blas and haven't figured out the day-to-day trends in the winds and the currents, we decided to put down a stern anchor to avoid an embarrassing swing into the beach situation. Plus, it makes for good practice. We quickly found our way into the water to check the anchor, but soon realized we were not alone. What we first thought was floating plastic soon turned out to be a Portuguese man-o-war, something we have never seen before while on Tarka. These guys are actually not individuals, but rather colonies of organisms dependent on one another. For instance, the inflatable bladder that acts like a sail is its own organism, while the tendrils are another. Their stingy bits can stretch for many meters, and on contact with skin result in one of the most painful stings the ocean has to offer. But fortunately, these ones had only short stingy bits.
There's a little fish swimming into the lagos. Was it also the one you saw?
Yeah, it's like they're in all of them. There's like these little fish.
I saw that there too, yeah.
Somehow, these little fish have evolved to coexist and exploit the stingy tendrils as a safe haven, and feeding off of scraps of food caught by the man-o-war. We soon realized that it wasn't just 1 or 2 man-o-wars, but many. In fact, the entire island was covered with those that had washed ashore. I guess we'll need to keep a close eye out while we're in the water. Back on Tarka, a few Kuna Indians in a dugout paid us a visit, and we happily bought a few lobster from them. After all, these islands are their home, and it's the very least we can do for them sharing this paradise with us. That meant, of course, that it was lobster for dinner. And Roni and Tyler kindly made a delicious meal for us. And actually, probably one of the best we've ever had on Tarka.
Lekker?
It's good?
But maybe the food just tastes that much better in good company. And with an unbeatable view. We spent another day here, exploring the little islands, and doing a bit of snorkeling. The coral here appears to be amongst the healthiest we've ever seen, though we're only getting our first glimpses. But before we knew it, it was already time to get going, so that Roni and Tyler could be picked up and begin their journey back to Panama City. Unfortunately though, Nushta had fallen ill, and as we slowly started to realize, had probably been sick for a week already, with all her symptoms pointing to dengue fever, likely contracted from a mosquito in Colombia. For now, that meant that she was in charge of resting, and I took care of the easy task of sailing the boat. Which it really was. The sailing could hardly be more perfect here. And just like that, it was time to say goodbye to our guests. This, after all, was a vacation for them, and they had jobs to return to.
You guys ready?
Yes, not really.
Let's dream.
Go down tight.
We gotta be on time.
Oh.
Not going anywhere.
Alright, taking Tarka with us. Let's get out of here.
With Nushta sick, I took Roni and Tyler in the dinghy to the island where they could be picked up. I'll admit, it was a bit crowded with 4 people on Tarka, and in the long term, I think we'd eventually throw each other overboard. However, for just the week, it was great to have their company, and perhaps we'll even see them again someday. With our guest gone, Nushta's condition started to worsen, and San Blas isn't exactly the best place to be sick. We didn't have any internet or phone service, so word of mouth from our neighbors was the only resource we had for help. Luckily, someone told us that there was a medical clinic on one of the inhabited islands, a short sail away. So, while Nushta rested, I hauled up the anchor, which is a lot more difficult now that we've upgraded to larger chain, and got us on track for the Cardi Islands near the mainland. This sail was easy, and gentle enough that I didn't even bother to take the engine off the dinghy. Though that's not something we really like to do. The Cardi Islands are densely populated and pretty bare bones. But they have a few basic things. We weren't allowed to film inside the clinic, and anyway, we were too focused on getting Nushta some help. A friendly nurse sent us away with some medicine to relieve the symptoms, but in the end, dengue has to be waited out. So we spent a few days anchored here, and became popular with the local birds. Once Nusha is better, we will sail back out in the San Blas in search of sharks, old friends, new friends, and some of the most incredible anchorages Tarka has ever been to. But all of that is just going to have to wait.